everybody, and welcome to Policy Driven, a podcast on global transport policy. My name is Thomas Jérémy Hednafev, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mark Watts. Today, we are delighted to be speaking with Laurianne Krid, the new Chief Executive Officer of the European Cyclists Federation. Laurianne brings more than 15 years of experience in European mobility and international organizations, including 8 years as Director General of FIA Region I. She took up her role at the ECF on the 1st of September, succeeding Jill Warren, who led the organization through 5 transformative years. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Tom. It's great to be back. Hello, everyone, all our regular and great viewers that have been watching previous episodes. Welcome back to Policy Driven. It's a real pleasure to have Laurianne with us today. Welcome, Laurianne.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. That sounds like a really interesting discussion, so I'm looking forward.
Perfect. Laurianne, before we turn to policy and cycling, I want to start with you. How did your journey in European mobility begin? What drew you to this field? And quite frankly, how did you end up in Brussels?
Thank you for this question. Well, basically, there was not such a long way from my European studies to Brussels. So I did European studies in France. I was keen on discovering the Brussels bubble that we all work in. And in terms of why into the mobility, I would say maybe like everyone else, it was a bit of an accident in a way. It appealed to me. There was a position in Brussels. And what I like and still enjoy very much about mobility is the diversity. So you really work on things such as consumer protection, tourism, very technical issues. And it's also a topic on which everyone, including my neighbors, has a strong opinion about. So everyone has their own opinion about mobility and how it should be. Everyone had their own little stories. So it's a great connector at the end of the day as a topic.
I think fundamentally, perhaps that's the role of mobility and transportation, is to connect goods and people. What was your first job in Brussels, and how did you go from that to being Chief Executive Officer of the ECF?
Well, my first job in Brussels was essentially being a junior in a policy organization. That was the FIA Region I at the time. I did look into the more legal topics when it came to consumer protection, road safety, environment, and so on. And I was essentially junior, moved on to, senior policy director, and then ultimately director general of the FIA Region I for the last 8 years. And then essentially what I like to repeat, especially in this position, is that even at FIA, which was definitely a mobility organization centered around the car at first, but then growing into mobility, I always kind of firmly believe that none of us is just a car driver, just a cyclist, just a pedestrian. So I always advocated for the fact that each of us actually use different modes and that we should talk about, how we can do synergies between the modes. Fun fact about me that many know, I never owned a car actually. So I've always been the one who's been, advocating for that, the best means of transportation for the best trip. At ACF isn't in contradiction at all with what I've been preaching all these years.
Yeah, in fact, I was actually going to ask you that question because I think it's perceived to be, as you say, a very different organisation. FIA, a lot of respect, and it's had a big positive impact over many years. And you were leader there in Region I for several years, and then you made the transition to cycling. But as you say, that there are real connections between all these things because we all know connectivity relies on intermodality, all the modes being used. But why do you think we have that problem of we're perceived to be in silos when actually a lot of us are working constantly to join up the dots?
Well, I guess we're resting on a bit of an old-fashioned way of seeing things, seeing people as being only the one or the other. That being said, I must say that the FIA itself and many of their members have been working into expanding. And interestingly enough, when I joined as ECF, I had loads of people from the FIA reaching out saying, wow, I'm such an enthusiastic cyclist. Do you know the best routes in Europe? Do you know this and this study about cycling? So I don't think the worlds are as separate as we depict them. Obviously, when you're in interest representation, you want to make your sector as special and unique as can be. In the reality of the day-to-day, we all see that this is way more porous than what you actually expect it to be.
We talked about the EU bubble that we're all in. does tend to focus on the modes in their silos, and I think a lot of us, we still find that approach very, very challenging, and I think it is changing. It's beginning to break down, but it's very refreshing, Laurianne. You are bringing that more interconnected approach to your new role.
I would echo what you said as well, Laurianne. I mean, I was talking to someone today, and they said, what's cool about transport? And I said, well, first off, it's transport, so it's cool anyways. But when you talk about transportation, the transport transition, you invariably talk about energy. You invariably talk about industrial strategy. You invariably talk about trade policy. So it really does spiral, and it is all very much interconnected, as you mentioned. But indeed, I think everybody does have an opinion, rightfully or wrongly, in some situations. Probably rightly. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but they're also entitled to be wrong, in my humble view. I want to talk about your different organizations. So we talked about the FIA very briefly, but it's also the FIA Region I. If I'm not mistaken, it's a non-governmental organization. Is that correct?
Yes.
How would you say working in an NGO is different than working in, well, what you do now, which is the European Cyclists Federation, a trade association, if you will?
I would say there are a lot of similarities. We worked essentially with members. It's basically the legal form was not so different. It's not for profit. That's a bit the same as in a trade association. The objective is not to make profit. So there, I don't see a huge difference in the way of working. Maybe one of the main differences is that in a way the members from FIA Region I were a bit more homogeneous. At ECF, we have actually we're all members, which are essentially cyclist federations at national level. That's about 70 of them in Europe and a bit beyond. We also have, well, the cities and regions network, the cities and regions that work with cycling extensively and that rely on us for more content, talking with like-minded regions to be able to exchange and to make the best for their citizens. We have a scheme which is like cycling-friendly employers network, where employers that actually provide structures for their employees can be certified by our members as well. That's more than 1,500 certified employers, including the European Parliament. And we have national networks that kind of basically cater for the Eurovelo routes, which are large cycling tourism routes across Europe. And they're a coalition of national partners, if you wish. All of that creates a landscape around and shows how cycling is at the heart of society in every of its aspects already. So it's very different needs, very different types of members, and the breadth is actually much larger than what I had in the FIA Region I, in my opinion.
As some of you might know, we were working on publishing a book on cycling policy, and it's precisely that which I've realized recently is how wide and far-reaching cycling can be, from velo tourism, which I participate in, to evidently commuting, and everything in between. Mark, out of curiosity, have you ever tried the Eurovelo cycle network?
No, but I'd love to learn more. I must admit, I'm a great fan of cycling, and I was an avid cyclist as a young person. Moved to Brussels, and I'm afraid it all stopped. It's just because I tried it and I found it personally terrifying on the roads in Brussels. We've probably come on to this. I mean, it's improved a lot in the last 10, 20 years. And I should try it again, I know. And there are people like me that want to be a cyclist, but I need a bit of mentoring, I think. But it's totally nice how cities like Brussels have been transformed to make them more, better, not just for cyclists but for pedestrians as well. And perhaps we'll come on to that as well. That having compatibility between the two is also, I think, for many of us, an important goal.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry.
No, please carry on, Laurianne, please.
I really can relate to that. I moved to Brussels 16 years ago, coming from Strasbourg, where I was cycling every day for everything I needed, and tried it a few times. And then, I was this limited range cyclist. I would go to 3-4 kilometers. Anything beyond felt like, it's a bit too far. It's not the appropriate infrastructure. And obviously, I started cycling again on the 1st of September to work, which is slightly more than my optimal range. 6.5 kilometers with a big hill. But I was amazed at how the infrastructure improved. It's amazing. It's amazing, much better. And I guess there are two things that are the mental barrier you put yourself to. For me, the first one is I want to have my trip in my head. I want to know where I'm going. I don't want to have to stop every so-and-so to find out where I'm going. And my way is actually very simple. I did it once and then I didn't need to look at it again. and I need to be comfortable and as much as possible outside of traffic, which I must say for my trip is probably 90-95% of the time. So
Laurianne,
it's improved a lot. Yeah.
Laurianne, cycling has moved from maybe what was 25 years ago, a relatively niche topic outside Denmark and the Netherlands, into really quite widespread. I lived in London for many years. If you go to Hyde Park, there'll be thousands of cyclists. There's a cycling highway. I currently live in Lille in northern France. We have all the roads, the main arteries are being redone to include really nice cycle paths. Why do you think cycling has become so prominent? And I guess the climate issue isn't necessarily sufficient in answering that.
No, I think I can tell you for myself. I mean, one of the reasons is efficiency. I want to be as fast as possible from A to B. In many of the cities with congested centers and whatever, it's a very efficient option. I'm actually as fast as with public transport that I used to take, probably faster than with a car in my 6 kilometers trip. So there's a pure, my time is valuable. Then there's another aspect which I find relevant for me as well, which is the health factor. We're all in such busy lifestyles. We're all kind of thinking of how to fit this extra hours or two of sports. Well, commuting is not sports. Still, it gets the job done. You're actually more active. You're healthier. Also, better mental health, which has become a huge issue in the recent years. And then I guess the third one is more of a pull effect from the infrastructure. You see the infrastructure, you see more people on their bikes, and you're like, why not me? And then you have a few events such as the Car Free Sunday and whatever that kind of reminds people, okay, that's an option. So I guess it's a constellation of things. For me, the efficiency and the actual health benefits were one of the key levers, to be honest, from my side. Then it would be interesting to see broader. But seeing other people cycle, Mark was mentioning mentoring. I'm on that path. I've been trying to mentor a fellow friend with whom I swim. She's been telling me I want to cycle, but I'm not sure. And I was telling her, come with me once or twice, because I do know this mental.
Yeah,
What does it take?
exactly.
And then you optimize your trip, because basically the first days I started 1st of September, I optimized a few tricks here and there where I felt, okay, there I can improve. And there's making that a habit. And if you make that a habit, then it's not anymore at all an issue. But there's all these steps, I think, and all these reasons why it's become more popular. But it always was popular. I mean, active mobility should not be about a political party, a preference, whatever. We all want to move from A to B as efficiently as possible.
I think often it's not sold on the efficiency arguments. It's very good to hear you make that efficiency point. Certainly in Brussels, many cities, it is the most efficient method, the quickest method of traveling, but it's not often portrayed like that. I still think we have some people in policy making that still see it as like, oh, it's a leisure option. It's not an integral part of the choices we have going to work, for example. It's changing, but in my view, not fast enough. And perhaps we'll come on to that, Lauren. What more we need to do to encourage more people to get out of their cars in particular and get on their bikes. I mean, mentoring would be great for someone like me, but there may be other things we can do as policymakers, politicians, professionals. What more do you think needs to be done to sustain the growth we've seen in the last 10 or 20 years?
Make it safe.
You've pretty got a long list of things.
Well, I will try to focus, but make it safe in the sense of have an appropriate infrastructure, including the right path, the right lighting, the right width, I would say, of these, because sometimes now we have various modes that coexist. Essentially, you have the e-scooters, you have the electric bikes, you have the non-electric bikes like mine. You do create a bit of tension in the traffic system. It's a traffic system itself, so give it sufficient space, which is always a challenge in cities, very clearly, because we're all competing for space. Make it affordable as much as possible. I mean, bikes per se, the normal bikes are not so expensive, but they still may be a barrier for some to enter that market. So in that sense, the bike sharing schemes are an option. The taxation incentives for employers, for example, and there's one example coming up with a clean corporate vehicles proposal where we think bikes should be an integral part of what we offer employees when they're offered a mobility option. And beyond that, the leasing system, so that you don't have to shoulder basically the cost of a full cost of an electric bike or a larger cargo bike for your family, but you can actually still benefit from it. Schemes such as the ones that allow you to rent a bike for your kids when they grow up for a minimal amount of money, so that you don't have to buy a new bike every year when they outgrow the previous ones. These are all options for more modest families that have a role to play. So make it safe, make it affordable, and don't make an ideology out of it. It's not an ideology.
Yeah.
It's about going from A to B. It's not about a political party or a fringe of the population against the other. That's why I don't want to say take people out of their car. I think we should encourage people to take the best mode for whatever needs they have at a given time. And thinking about it, of course, a heavy investment in a car makes it your preferred mode per se. If you make it sound and look like the restructuring in many city centers around lower speeds and different infrastructure, then it becomes a better option to cycle or walk or take public transport. I think that's one way is that cities are looking at it at the moment.
Would you say that the politicization of cycling infrastructure in some cities, again, use an example from London or even in Lille, where, as I said, we're redoing a lot of the roads, and we're introducing low emission zones, has a negative effect on the perception of cycling? Or do you think that despite debates that occur in local politics and local policy, people still have a relatively positive view of cycling as a means of transportation?
I think changing people's habits is always complicated, no matter what the city. And I think many of our cities have been built around the idea that the car should take lots of space and that it's fine. Rebalancing that creates some tensions at the margins. But what you can see is that whenever these plans are actually adopted and through, people are generally very happy about it. So it's an act of political courage to kind of say, okay, we want to be there. We want to make a difference. We do have figures showing that, after such plans, the cities are more breathable, more livable, more efficient generally. And that's something that I think we can all aim for. Of course, the transition and the path there can be sometimes challenging for some. So recognizing, being courageous, and I think all in all, we all want cities we are happy to live in.
I think we all are indeed. On the European level, though, a few years ago, the European Cyclists Federation, pardon me, helped push forward this European Cycling Declaration, a lot of acronyms, which was endorsed by many of the institutions, including, I think, then TRAN committee member Karima Deli, and all member states. In fact, I was there, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Seville when that was signed. I remember being there with, I think it was a Belgian presidency of the council, as well as Jill Warren, your predecessor. For listeners less familiar with it, what is the declaration? And perhaps more importantly, what did it seek to solve and why was it needed?
Well, for us, it was like our El Dorado to a certain extent. That's what we've been asking for. We've been asking for a commitment at the highest level. So a political commitment recognizing cycling as one mode of transport and a mobility mode. So that means as well that with this recognition should come policy, financial, and political resources flowing into the cycling. So it's super interesting for us, especially because on cycling, you have various levels of governance involved. Obviously, you have some role for the EU, you have some role for the member states, for the regions, for the cities. So giving this kind of framework in terms of this is what we collectively aim to achieve and each level will play its role was key for us. So we have better policy coordination, we have better view on what works and what doesn't. And then for sure, this is significant because it creates a roadmap for further financial and political investments that can help develop cycling for better streets, better climate resilience, and better economics as well. So it was really the recognition of this is something we want to see happen at European level. Each level will play its part.
Was it hard to achieve that?
I think so. I think, that's probably something you should ask Jill. I think it was a conjunction of people that were very driven and very aware of the objective of cycling. At the same time, because of the kind of different responsibilities and different levels, it is hard to get this kind of union or unity behind one common text, looking into ambitions at various governance level at the end of the day. So yeah, it required a very unique constellation of well, stars if you wish, to get that through and to get into that political commitment, which is strange when you see the actual value and benefits of cycling at the EU level itself. Not so when you consider that, well, cities are quite in the driving seats when it comes to cycling policies on a day-to-day.
Mark, have you ever worked on urban transport issues in your long and illustrious career?
On and off. Yeah, as perhaps some of you know, I started off as an urban transport planner in London, just following the abolition many decades ago of the GLC. So was working on transport policy. Again, it was very immature then, cycling policy. It's great that we've come a long way, both as a profession, but also as policymakers and indeed in political classes. Yeah, going back to the declaration, because I think it's something that we lacked when I was working in London, in local government in London, that we didn't have a hook to hang cycling policy on. Do you think not just the EU, but cities, regions, and indeed an inspiration across the world that has allowed cycling to be mainstreamed, which is where it should be? Do you think it has more than symbolic value, in other words?
Yeah, it has, because then it rests on the number of things that we can build on that. And I think when you look into the report 1 year down the line, 1 year after the signing of the declaration, we see that we are there. We're tracking the financial investments from EU fund for cycling project. We're currently at 3.2 billions. Which should lead to the building of 12,000 kilometers of new cycling infrastructure. I think the declaration from our end as well also enabled to draw support from the EU to quantify the length and types of cycling infrastructure in all EU countries. It's called the Cycling Counts project, and it's very important because with these figures you can actually start tracking the progress. Until you've measured and actually looked into the benchmark, it's very hard to track the progress. What I find also inspiring in my different dealings with our members is that, and you've been mentioning that a bit, Tom, there are the front runners, the people we know that have been for years, the good ones, the best in class, let's call them like this, the Netherlands and Denmark and so on and so forth. But other countries are also in need of other champions, like not necessarily the top of the class, but people that have similar kind of challenges in their own cities and examples that are beyond the best in class. And I think with that, we've kind of enriched the narrative around what can be a good project in different countries of different sizes and so on. And we've inspired more. So I think in that sense, what it shows is that with a declaration, you can actually federate a lot more knowledge around one common idea. And we also know what is success, better quality, making sure investments flows into the project through EU funding, but others focus on making multimodality a reality. I mean, we've just recently published a report which is called Bikes on Trains. I'll make it one last time, but I'll stop, because I always say our report is called Cyclists Love Trains, but trains don't always love cyclists. It's a bit the other way around. Yeah, it's an easy one, but it's always a bit fun. So we've looked into how easy is it to bring your bike onto a train to your holiday destination if that's what you want to do. So these are all the things that we now know we can track, and we can also look into bike theft, which has become a growing concern when you have more and more expensive bikes. So these are the topics that we can deal with at the European level, and the fact that the European level has invested in measuring shows deep commitment into where it goes. What's also very important for our members generally is just to be able to show what works, what doesn't, also learn from the mistakes, let's say, or from what didn't work in other cities and regions. There's a whole lot of intelligence that can be shared on these matters, and that is enabled at another level through the declaration. So I think it's work in progress, but it's really enabled a lot of good, positive changes for cycling in Europe.
I want to maybe, if I can, hone in on this multimodality aspect, because I have an axe to grind with bikes on trains.
Okay, go.
As I've mentioned, I live in Lille. My partner lives in Brussels. And if I want to bring my bike to her in Brussels, I would probably have to take a slow train and not a TGV, which would take me over an hour and a half. Because the SNCF has no space on its TGVs, at least the ones that go from Lille to Brussels, to accommodate bikes. A friend of mine who lives in rural Belgium wanted to come down to Lille, and he faced the same headaches. It's absolutely impossible for him to bring his fancy bike all the way to us. And likewise, when I go on holiday in Portugal, I end up on a train that does have space for it. We have to, sometimes you have old infrastructure that requires you to carry a 10, 20 kilo bike up and down stairs. What do you guys find at the ECF when it comes to bike train multimodality? And I guess from a polemic perspective, who is to blame?
Yeah, we all love blaming game. I think ultimately it's really down to the same things we were mentioning in the cities. It's a fight for space within the train. Bicycles take space that is usually sold. I mean, let's be honest, you don't take them for free usually in the train. You pay for it. You don't pay quite as much as a passenger. I think it's different strategies of different operators that are very often national. A bit as you mentioned, because you named and blamed, I didn't. But
I gladly name and blame.
But that's really that. It's really a bit of a part of their operations, and then part of the problem they have is that it's also partially a seasonal thing. That you will have way more people that want to travel with their bikes over the nicer month of the year. Let's say, I don't know, from March to September, and that they actually build the architecture of the trains based on what is needed all year round. So that there is a big challenge for them to dedicate space. But there we have a few hooks in EU legislation, the passenger rights legislation, and so on that we're looking at to try to make that a possibility, of course. But then what you mentioned in terms of putting your bike up and down, that's more the structure of the station. So that's something that's also quite heavy investment, I guess, from their end.
Do you think Europe and I guess also national governments should see cycling more as an industrial and economic opportunity, or are they right to consider it as a public transport issue or a local transport issue?
Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, the cycling industry is actually quite a vibrant sector when you look at it. I mean, it creates about 1 million jobs, generates about 10 billion in revenues, and for example, many of the cycling cycles are manufactured in the EU, Portugal being one of the key destinations. So it has both a substantial value when it comes to value chains and creating jobs in Europe. And now we're talking, what I was telling you is just manufacturing, but obviously you have the repair, the maintenance of these bikes, which will be more often when you talk to about, let's say, the larger electric bikes. And then, of course, there's the actual intrinsic value of cycling. So you generate health benefits, you generate a lot of non-cost at the end of the day. So I find it hard for people and politicians probably to understand that basically it's costs that don't occur. So on the one hand, there's money you should put out in infrastructure, potentially in bike sharing schemes and whatever. On the other hand, the benefits are actually not flowing in anybody's pockets per se. They're just not leaving your pockets. So it makes it for a harder case to advocate for global benefits for society. But it's a lot of benefits. It's a lot of health benefits. It's also a lot around tourism. Cycling tourism has been shown as bringing quite a lot of revenue. The cycling tourists spend more on their destination than the other tourists generally. They travel a bit lighter. And they also expand to, well, other parts. You know, you won't go to London, where I'm sure London has enough tourists at the moment, but you might want to go in the outskirts in a suburb and benefit society there, and go a bit against, you know, the mass tourism and the overflow and people coming to visit. So it's good for territories, it's good for people, it's good for generating, let's say, options for people to meet and exchange for real. And it's a homegrown EU industry with about 1 million jobs, so it's still worth looking into that part.
More than worth it in my mind. Laurianne, based off your experience, what's the one takeaway really all policy stakeholders should take from the cycling sector? You said 1 million jobs. Is that the headline figure, or is there something else that they really should keep with them?
No, I think the headline figure would be 570 million cyclists. No, how many are we now in Europe? I mean, it should be that we're all should cycle there, and then it's more than 1 million job that we will have out there. No, to me, it's really about the one takeaway should be really consider your mobility as a system. Think about what's the optimal system for yourself. And yeah, you might have invested in XYZ. I'm pretty sure many of us have many options available. On a given trip, think about what makes the most sense for you, and more generally as well for society, and then go for it.
As simple as that.
I think we get more cycling then.
Yeah,
that's my hope.
Clear. Yeah, it's pretty clear, but also pretty inspiring as well. I think both for us as professionals, policymakers, but also as citizens with families and friends as well, to take that message out. I think it's a very fresh way of looking at it. So maybe less ideological It's not about car versus cycling versus walking versus public transport. It's actually what is the most optimal system for you as a user. And that would draw many of us to cycling. So I've got to now give it a go, haven't I?
Yeah, you have to.
You have no choice.
Next podcast, you need to report, Mark.
I need a mentor though, Laurianne.
Yeah, well, come to Brussels. I mean, I can take you on my route, no problem. And I'm not too fast, so I'm more of a commuting type of cyclist. So, but indeed, it's also per trip. I think what people don't want is too much us going around and saying, well, cycling is better for X, Y, Z, and you should do it. It's just like it's a decision you take on every single trip.
Hmm.
It doesn't need to be you need to go 100% on cycle. I mean, even now I have still my mental barrier of probably 10 kilometers. I won't go much beyond 10 kilometers for a given trip, and I'll find for another option. But even if I only take half of the things I took by public transport or car into a bike or an active mode, it changes quite a lot the mix. So we're looking out for numbers, not necessarily for changing someone from no bike at all to only bike. There's a lot of in between, and we need to work on these in between so that we don't end up being putting people in opposition to each other. We're all building society, we're all trying the best we can. We need to figure out what's the best trip now that I can do, what's the best option for me.
That makes complete sense. And on those very optimistic words, thank you, Laurianne, for your time, and we sincerely wish you best of luck in your relatively new role as CEO of the ECF.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And we look forward to welcoming all of you on the next episode of Policy Driven, where we will continue our interviews with stakeholders, furthering and developing the world of sustainable transport policy.
And stay tuned because Mark is reporting on his cycling experience.
On his cycling adventures.
Exactly.
Yeah. Look forward to that.